Hi everyone, I'm Christy here with Paint & Co. to help give some insights into how to successfully sew my newest pattern, Mod Cutout. Mod Cutout is a pattern that I created specifically for the fabric collection Fractals that I designed for Craftsy a long time ago. It's a modern blender collection that took on a bright retro vibe. It wasn't really the intent, but that's where it ended up. Design is funny that way. Collections just take on a life of their own. I designed this pattern specifically for Quilting Cat Crafts. So the full kit and all these fabrics can be purchased there, quiltingcatcrafts. Otherwise, a digital download is available on my site, paintandco.com. I highly recommend reading all the instructions completely through in order to make sure you've got a good idea of how to successfully sew this bad boy. I make some recommendations from spray starch and an 8.5-inch square ruler to help you make a life a little easier. But let's just go ahead and jump in. So here's your kit and what you'll receive. You've got your pattern along with about 7.5 yards of various fractal prints in a full spectrum of colors. We've got the foil print in pink, waves, arrows, radial, circuits, abstracts, fragments, lots of geometric and textural prints in pinks, oranges, yellows, greens, and purples. You've got about 1/4 yard of most fabrics and then 3/8 to 1/2 yard of some other select fabrics. Then you've got 3/4 yards for your binding and 2 3/4 yards for your background fabric. Okay, here we go. Start by cutting out your templates. Get some good paper scissors. Don't use your fabric scissors, please. Paper dulls your beloved fabric scissors, and we want our fabric scissors pristine for our fabric, especially for this project, because you need to cut everything with scissors, not a rotary cutter. Also, as you're cutting out your templates, please take note of the little blue notches on the templates. These are notches where you will snip an 1/8 inch into the seam allowance to act as a guide for aligning your pieces. This is all noted in the pattern, but want to make sure to bring it to your attention. So once you've got your templates all cut out, you've got 3 blocks and they are all sewn using the templates. So here is block 1, which corresponds to all T1 templates. Block 2, which corresponds to all T2 templates. This is also the most extensive of all the blocks because it's got the most piecing. It's a little tricky, but once you see me do it, I promise it'll make a lot more sense. And here is block 3, which corresponds to all T3 templates. Okay, so starting with block number 1, grab all your T1 templates, which is just T1A and T1B. I'm showing you using fabrics W, Fragments Lavender, and fabric X, Arrows Lavender, plus the background fabric AA, Circuits White. In the pattern, I've given you templates for how everything should be laid out to make sure you have enough fabric. With all the colored fabrics, you've got room for some error, but with your background fabric, you must follow the template layout to make sure you have enough fabric. Otherwise, you might find yourself crumb piecing some of the pattern pieces. I may or may not have a few crumb pieced blocks over here. In your cutting instructions, I recommend cutting the fabrics in strips at specified widths. You can then stack the layers in order to cut 2 layers at a time. Starting with the fragments in lavender, I've cut my strips and now positioning my template on top according to the layout diagram. Now I'm pinning my template onto those 2 layers. I'm pinning at 2 points and along the big curve. I don't really need one along the straight edge. Then we just cut around the template, trying not to cut the paper. Once you've cut out your template, don't forget to clip your notches. These are your guides. So just go into those little blue notches in the template and just give a little snip. Keep it inside the seam allowance. Otherwise, you might have a hole in your block. If you want to cut a little triangle into your template so that you don't have to actually use your fabric scissors to cut into the paper, that's a phenomenal idea. Now, let's get into our background fabric for block 1. Remember, the layout for this fabric must be followed in order to have enough. Truly though, if you do miscut, crumb piecing isn't the worst thing to happen to this pattern. As long as you are not entering this quilt into some sort of precision contest, I promise your quilt will not be ruined. You'll have plenty of extra scraps to pull something together. I had a few moments where I really felt like I had ruined this project, but I took a step back and I did a little crumb piecing. And honestly, you can't tell unless you're really, really looking for it. Believe me, I know the feeling of a ruined quilt. And I'm starting by cutting my strip width for template 1B. I'm now pinning my template in place according to the layout diagram. And cut, cut, cut. And honestly, just keep cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting until you've got 84 of these lovely white curves. Don't forget the notches. Now for sewing the pieces together. First, find your center notch of your purple leaf. Then find the center notch of your background and pin. Then you are going to find the outside notches on your purple leaf and pin the edge of your background piece at the notches on both sides of the leaf. Then evenly distribute your fabric along the curve and pin in between those notches. This helps during sewing so as to avoid any puckering and pleating in your curve. If you can smooth and distribute while sewing without pinning, by all means, go for it. I cannot. I need to pin. This block is a little tricky because the background fabric actually pieces into the leaf, so it sort of just blends in. Unfortunately, curved piecing is pretty wasteful on your fabric yields. However, once you've finished your mod cutout quilt, I've got a quick video showing what I'm going to do with my scraps. I'm actually really excited about this scrap project. Let's just say there is fabric lamination involved, and if that doesn't entice you, I don't know what will. Once you've got your leaf sewn, if you need to, in order to get the fabric to lay super flat for pressing, you can actually go along the curve and clip into the seam allowance. This will give a little ease of the seam allowance in order for it to lay super flat. And get your iron and press, press, press. Then repeat for all 84 half leaves. Once you've got all your half leaves, sew 2 half blocks together along the leaf edge in the specified color combinations to make the full leaf block. And there you go, block number 1. And now for block number 2, the flower block. cutting the background fabric for block number 2. So it's the same process of setting out the templates in the specified layout, pinning and cutting. But this one is kind of tricky because this was seriously the only layout that I could come up with that maximized the fabric. So take a really good look at the layout diagram. It's basically rotating the positioning of template 2B and template 2D. You'll see that that last third of the strip is actually needed for template 3E. So make sure you're keeping track of your pieces and saving that last section for block number 3. So again, look at your diagram, look at it, look at your layout, follow it, count your pieces. Then for the flower petals. For this one, I laid out both right and left templates and cut. Then for your yellow ring piece, I layered 2 strips of fabric, then cut in order to go a little faster. But same thing, lay out the template, pin and cut. And same thing for our pink center. Now onto the assembly for the quarter flower block. Here's the pieces we will need. I'm starting by sewing my white background fabric to the petal. Find your notches and pin. Then align the edges and pin. Then evenly distribute the fabric and pin in between. I'm now going to pin my pink center to my yellow ring. Align the center notch and pin. Then align the edges of the fabric, distribute the fabric evenly and pin. Lots of aligning and pinning. All right, let's get ready to sew. Go slow and watch your fabric. Due to these tight curves, it tends to bunch, so just keep an eye out. I'm pulling my pins as I go. I'm flattening and smoothing the fabric as I go. So I have to go really slow, lots of things happening. Then once you've done your petal piece to your background, you're now going to sew those 2 half petal pieces together. Nice, easy straight line. Now we need to sew our center circles to the petal. Pin the center notch of the circles to the center seam of the petal. Then align the edges, pin, evenly distribute the fabric in between. Pin again, and sew. We're almost there. Press, and voila! Quarter flower block. All right, we made it to the final block. Start by cutting out your background fabric. So using the strips previously cut, we are going to follow the same process. Follow the layout, pin, and cut. Don't forget the notches. This is also where we will need that final section from block 2. So again, just make sure you're taking a really good look at that layout. Once you've got your background pieces cut, we are going to cut the pink section of the OG. It's pretty similar to the petal pieces. Just lay out your left and right pieces, pin, and cut. Then the same thing for the orange section of the OG. Just make sure you follow the layout for the orange fabric because this is also needed for one of the flower blocks. We use the orange fabric for the petals. Now onto the assembly. Here's the pieces you'll need. First, sew one half of the OG together. So one pink and one orange piece. Pin. Then sew. Go slow, pull the pins, and watch the fabric. A bit of a theme here, I know. If you need to clip the seam allowance so the piece will lay super flat, go ahead, then press. Now we sew our white background to half of the OG. Find the notch on the pink OG and match up to the center notch of the background fabric. Align the edges of the fabric, pin, evenly distribute, and pin again. Then sew. Clip your seam allowance if needed, and press. Repeat that same process for the opposite side. Then sew the two pieces together to complete the block. And once you've got all those blocks sewn, it's time for the assembly. I recommend sewing in columns and then sewing each column together. I know it's a lot of cutting and pitting, but once you've got the rhythm of it, it's super doable. And you can do it, I promise. Go slow, pin, and just be consistent. You will get it done. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe, follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Be sure to drop in your projects into our Facebook group, A Different Kind of Quilter. I would love to see how your project came out. And also, like I mentioned, be sure to stay tuned for my next scrap video showing what I decided to do with my scraps from this project. Take care and see you next time.